This video does not confirm or diagnose any medical condition. Any health-related references are purely alleged and discussed only in a general commentary context. Right now, Hollywood isn't buzzing over a breakup, a diss track, or leaked messages. According to Jaguar Wright, the industry is shaken for a much darker reason. She claims a powerful inner circle has been quietly shielding a group of A-list men after what she describes as a risky chain of private choices connected to Teyana Taylor. During a tense live session, Jaguar didn't hold back. She openly named individuals, pointing first to Iman Shumpert as someone who allegedly realized early on that something was seriously off. She then linked Drake, Chris Brown, Aaron Pierre, Kanye West, and even Leonardo DiCaprio, suggesting they were all part of the same hidden pattern. Jaguar insists this was never about romance. She says it was about danger, silence, and who gets protected when situations spiral out of control. According to her, once certain private events unfolded, Hollywood went into full damage control mode. Lawyers stepped in, NDAs were signed, publicists reshaped narratives, and suddenly personalities changed. Projects were delayed, relationships collapsed without explanation, anxiety surfaced, and emotional breakdowns became impossible to ignore. Yet, Jaguar claims none of it reached the headlines, because it was never meant to. She alleges that anyone who seemed unstable afterward was quietly labeled unreliable not because they were lying, but because the truth made them a threat. In her words, this isn't just another celebrity scandal. It's a warning about how the industry operates behind closed doors. And what she's revealed, she says, is only the first crack in a wall hiding something far bigger.
Fired her ex-husband. She made him the bad guy.
The divorce would have never even been out if he didn't file the motion to use our full and legal name.
Then she had to go and she had to get new energy. What was she calling him? Her apple pies? Have you seen my apple pies?
Did you see my apple pie?
Oh my God, you did a love scene with Leonardo DiCaprio.
How was it shooting those scenes with Leo?
It was just work.
Buckle up, because behind the perfect smiles and red carpet glamour, Hollywood has always been better at covering up damage than stopping it. What happened during Jaguar Wright's live session wasn't chaotic or unfocused. It was calculated, calm, the kind of delivery that comes from someone who knows the seriousness of what they're saying and understands exactly why it stayed hidden for so long. She didn't begin with shock value. She began with silence, the kind that exists when powerful people make an unspoken agreement not to talk. According to Jaguar, that silence protected certain reputations, while others were left to quietly fall apart. She claimed that for years, a troubling pattern had been discussed behind closed doors in the industry, linked to Teyana Taylor and a circle of high-profile men across music, sports, and film. Jaguar framed the situation not as romance, but as risk. Choices made privately, with consequences that went far beyond emotions. And she alleged those consequences were never fully explained to everyone involved. When concerns finally surfaced, the response wasn't openness. It was containment. She suggested that Iman Shumpert was among the first to sense something was off, not through public drama, but through subtle changes people around him later noticed. Shifts in behavior, guarded conversations, and a growing distance where comfort once existed. In Jaguar's view, that moment wasn't isolated. It was the start of a larger pattern. As she continued, more names entered the conversation: Drake, Chris Brown, Aaron Pierre, Kanye West. Each mention added weight, not as direct accusations, but as part of a broader implication, that these figures were connected by the same thread of undisclosed risk and carefully managed silence. Then she mentioned Leonardo DiCaprio. She didn't point fingers or make direct claims. She didn't need to. The implication alone was enough to make listeners grasp how wide the alleged network might reach. According to Jaguar, once internal alarms were raised, Hollywood reacted in its usual way. Lawyers were brought in before honest conversations could happen. Publicists shaped stories before feelings could be processed. Non-disclosure agreements became shields, not for protection, but for control. She claimed there were records, messages, and confirmations kept out of public view, accessible only to a select few. In her telling, this hidden information explained patterns fans had questioned for years. Sudden breakups with no explanation, projects quietly delayed, and artists or actors disappearing under the vague label of personal reasons. Jaguar alleged those reasons weren't personal at all, they were strategic. She spent notable time speaking about Aaron Pierre, describing him as emotionally unprepared for the environment he had entered, suggesting that the pressure and secrecy surrounding it all took a heavier toll on some than others. She claimed that after certain relationships ended, his behavior shifted in ways that couldn't be explained by heartbreak alone. There was confusion, anxiety, and a kind of emotional dependence that comes from realizing you were involved in something much bigger than you ever understood. According to Jaguar, this wasn't weakness. It was a warning sign. She said that when people show visible distress after private situations like these, the industry doesn't respond with clarity. It responds with distance. Their stability is quietly questioned. Their emotions are treated as a risk, not in public, but through behind-the-scenes conversations that slowly weaken their credibility. Jaguar alleged the same quiet distancing happened with Iman Shumpert. No scandal, no headlines, just a gradual cooling. Invitations stopped. Energy shifted. Connections faded. To the outside world, it looked like normal relationship fallout. According to her, it was something far more calculated. She described what she called a silent system built for containment, private consultations, carefully worded advice, and coordination between reputation managers and legal teams, with nothing sensitive ever put in writing. The goal, she claimed, wasn't accountability. It was control of panic, of liability, and of questions no one wanted asked. According to Jaguar, Teyana Taylor stayed in constant motion during this time. Work schedules packed, travel nonstop, public appearances one after another. In her view, stillness invites scrutiny, but movement creates noise, and noise distracts. She alleged that relationships ended abruptly, without closure or explanation. When online whispers began, they disappeared just as fast. Blogs went quiet. Stories stalled. Journalists hesitated. Some reports, she said, entered legal review and never resurfaced. Access, she claimed, became a tool. Speak out and doors close. Push harder and your credibility is quietly undermined. Not through open attacks, but through subtle isolation. Jaguar insisted she wasn't speaking to ruin careers. She said she was speaking because people were left emotionally fractured while the system kept running smoothly around them. In her words, silence stopped being strategy and crossed into something unethical. She framed it as a structural problem, an industry that accepts human fallout as collateral damage as long as the image stays intact. She didn't issue threats. She issued warnings. More names, more records, more connections, she said, exist beyond what the public has seen. What's visible, in her view, is only the surface of something much larger. This, she argued, isn't just gossip. It's a crisis of trust. Jaguar also described how, once concerns surfaced privately, the response wasn't panic, it was coordination. Phone calls replaced texts. Meetings happened off the record. Advice was given verbally, never documented. She said some people were quietly encouraged to step back from the spotlight just long enough for narratives to be reshaped. When questions came, simple explanations were ready. Burnout, exhaustion, scheduling conflicts. She returned to Aaron Pierre, suggesting that what fans read as mood changes or distance may have been something deeper: confusion without context, anxiety without answers, and the pressure of being told not to ask questions. According to her, when discomfort was expressed, it wasn't met with truth. It was managed. Concerns were reframed as instability. Once someone is labeled unreliable, their voice loses weight. She claimed this quiet discrediting happened through missed calls, delayed responses, and opportunities that suddenly vanished. Nothing obvious enough to challenge, just enough to isolate. She suggested a similar pattern surrounded Iman Shumpert. No public fallout, just a slow withdrawal from spaces where uncomfortable questions might surface. To fans, it looked like a personal reset. According to Jaguar, it was the formation of a protective perimeter. She claimed collaborators were quietly cautioned, associates encouraged to keep conversations surface level, and anyone close to the situation treated as a variable that needed to be managed. According to Jaguar, names like Drake and Chris Brown surfaced, not because of public incidents, but because of private overlap connections that were never meant to exist in a space where transparency could reach them. The issue, she emphasized, wasn't individual actions. It was the silence that followed. Then she spoke about Kanye West, suggesting that when someone already labeled unpredictable becomes part of a situation like this, the response intensifies, not to protect the person, but to protect the system. In her view, unpredictability threatens controlled narratives, and controlled narratives are the foundation of reputation management. That, she implied, is why some voices are amplified while others are quietly muted, why certain struggles become public spectacle while others are carefully managed out of sight. It isn't about who is right or wrong. It's about who can be contained. Jaguar shifted the focus from individuals to the machinery behind them. She described an unspoken chain of command in moments of crisis. Lawyers first, then publicists, then reputation strategists. Emotional realities, if they are considered at all, come last. She said non-disclosure agreements don't just silence people legally. They isolate them psychologically. Once signed, individuals are left alone with experiences they are not allowed to speak about, even with those closest to them. According to her, that isolation does the deepest damage. When people can't talk, they internalize. And when they internalize, they begin to fracture. She alleged that journalists sensed something was off long before the public did. Tips came in. Questions were prepared. But stories stalled. Editors hesitated. Legal teams stepped in. Access, she said, was quietly used as leverage. Pushed too hard and doors closed. Blogs went quiet. Investigations dissolved. The internet, usually relentless, strangely moved on. In her view, that wasn't coincidence. It was influence. As fragments of a story surfaced online, fans began noticing patterns that didn't add up. Sudden breakups without explanation, projects delayed indefinitely, public figures disappearing at what should have been peak moments. Jaguar said these weren't random. They were symptoms of a system that values continuity over accountability. She made clear she wasn't trying to cast one person as a villain or others as innocent. Her focus was on how quickly human experiences are minimized when they threaten profitable images. She claimed some people were encouraged to seek private support while being subtly or directly urged to stay silent. Not because speaking would be wrong, but because it would be inconvenient. She described that silence as coercive. As her live continued, the tone shifted from revelation to warning. She said what she shared barely touched the surface, that the names mentioned were part of a much wider web. Evidence, she suggested, exists not only in messages, but in timelines, behavior changes, and patterns the public often dismisses as coincidence. Once silence becomes policy, she argued, harm multiplies quietly. She acknowledged the backlash she expected, being labeled bitter, unstable, attention-seeking. In her view, those labels are useful because when a messenger is discredited, the message becomes easier to ignore. But she insisted the pressure was already there, not publicly, but behind the scenes. Trust, she said, had cracked. Conversations had shifted. People were watching each other more carefully. She framed what followed not as chaos, but as recalibration. No loud denials, no dramatic statements. Just internal advisories, strategic distancing, and tighter circles. According to her, this is how power protects itself when structure, not just image, feels threatened. She returned to the idea of proximity, saying that simply being near a story like this can be as risky as being inside it. Some collaborators quietly stepped back. Invitations went unanswered. Projects were declined without explanation. It wasn't panic, she said. It was calculation. A test of loyalty. Who stays silent? Who asks questions? Who becomes inconvenient? She spoke again about Teyana Taylor, not as a caricature, but as an example of how quickly narratives are shielded when profitability is at stake. Every public move precise. Every absence explained. Every question redirected. According to Jaguar, that level of control isn't accidental. It's rehearsed. She said those on the edges felt the pressure most the ones, without powerful teams, to protect them. When they hesitated, it was framed as instability. When they withdrew, it became unreliability. She returned to Aaron Pierre, suggesting that what looked like quiet retreat was actually survival. Navigating an environment where speaking has a cost requires constant self-editing. Every word becomes a calculation. Every silence, a strategy. Not collapse, but erosion. She argued this is how systems maintain control without force. You don't silence people directly. You make the price of speaking higher than the price of staying quiet. In her view, others, including Armand Shumpert, experienced similar pressure. No threats, no ultimatums. Just the understanding that being too close to certain questions could limit future opportunities. She widened the lens to the media, saying reporters understood the weight of the story, but also the professional risk. Sources went cold. Editors demanded confirmations that couldn't be put on record. Legal teams raised concerns about exposure, not accuracy. Stories, she said, don't always die because they're false. They die because they're not permitted to live. Jaguar closed by saying this wasn't about celebrity drama. It was about what happens when trust becomes disposable and silence is rewarded more than honesty. Systems built on secrecy don't usually collapse in one moment. They weaken gradually, through inconsistencies, memory, and patterns people can't unsee forever. She didn't present it as a threat. She called it inevitability. Once people stop accepting partial truths as full explanations, the structure that depends on that acceptance begins to shift. Quietly, slowly, but permanently.